the world of the super-rich, some names command respect, others fear. Tobias Lennox commanded both. From his throne in the city's most exclusive restaurant, he could build or break fortunes with a single phone call. But he never expected the person to break him would be the one refilling his water glass. He saw a simple waitress. He should have seen a ghost from a past he buried long ago. What she said next didn't just silence the room. It was a whisper that became an earthquake, making a world-renowned chef drop his knife in the middle of a chaotic kitchen. This isn't just a story of confrontation. It's a story of a debt coming due. The air in Ethelgard's was different. It wasn't just filtered, it was curated. It smelled of old money, a subtle blend of leather from the Chesterfield banquettes, beeswax from the polished mahogany, and the faintest, most expensive whisper of truffle oil wafting from the kitchen. It was an atmosphere designed to insulate its patrons from the grubby reality of the world outside its heavy, soundproofed doors. And tonight its most prized patron was holding court. Tobias Lennox didn't occupy a table, he annexed it. He sat at the center of the semicircular booth in the restaurant's heart, a position reserved for royalty, or those who paid enough to be treated as such. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, the dark silk whispering of its expense with every slight movement. His watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, was worth more than the combined annual salaries of the entire waitstaff. He wasn't just a man having dinner, he was an emperor surveying his domain. His guests, a pair of nervous-looking junior partners, hung on his every word, their laughter a fraction too loud, their nods a shade too eager. 24-year-old Audrey Cole, known to her colleagues as Audie, approached the table with the practiced ease of someone who had long mastered the art of being invisible. 3 years of serving in high-end establishments had taught her the rhythm of the wealthy, anticipate their needs before they arise, speak only when spoken to, and never, ever let them see the person behind the uniform. Her face was a mask of pleasant neutrality, her movements fluid and efficient as she refilled their water glasses from a heavy crystal pitcher. And the beauty of the deal Tobias was booming his voice, a low rumble of absolute self-assurance, is that we cut out the sentimental dead weight. Henderson's company was all about legacy and vision. Noble concepts, but they don't move the needle. We took their core tech, repackaged it, and tripled the valuation in 18 months. He couldn't see the forest for the trees. We bought the forest, clear-cut it, and sold the lumber. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. The junior partners joined in their sycophantic chorus, echoing in the hushed opulence of the room. Audie's hand didn't tremble. Her expression didn't flicker. But inside her chest, a cold, hard knot tightened. It was a knot that had been there for 10 years, a permanent resident in the landscape of her soul. She had heard variations of this speech. Her whole life whispered in panicked phone calls, read in devastating legal letters, and finally declared in the stark, unforgiving print of her father's obituary. Sentimental dead weight. That's what Tobias Lennox had called her father, David Cole. She had known this day would come. It wasn't an accident that she was working at Ethelgard's Tobias Lennox's favorite restaurant. It had taken her a year to get the job, a year of faking her resume, charming the notoriously difficult manager Mr. Henderson, and proving she was quiet, competent, and utterly forgettable. All for this, for a chance to stand in the same rarefied air as the man who had taken everything from her and look him in the eye. She finished pouring the water and was about to retreat into the shadows when Tobias snapped his fingers, a sound as sharp and insulting as a whip crack. "You, girl." Audie paused, turning back to the table. "Sir." The sommelier recommended the Chateau Margaux. "This," he said, gesturing disdainfully at the half-full decanter of eye-wateringly expensive red wine, tastes corked. "It's breathing all wrong. It's an insult to the vintage. Have him bring another, and tell him if he gets it wrong again, I'll have him pouring wine at an Olive Garden by next week." He didn't even look at her as he spoke, directing his complaint to the room at large. Audie's training screamed at her to nod, apologize, and scurry away, but the knot in her chest pulsed hot and angry. She looked at the wine, she looked at the man, and she made a choice. "There's nothing wrong with the wine, Mr. Lennox," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the ambient hum of the restaurant. Tobias Lennox stopped mid-sentence. His head, framed by a mane of silver hair, turned slowly, his pale blue eyes narrowing on her for the first time. It was like a searchlight finding a target. The junior partners froze their forks halfway to their mouths. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, a dangerous calm entering his voice. "I said," Audie repeated, her heart now hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "There's nothing wrong with the wine. It was decanted 90 minutes ago at the precise recommendation for a 95 Margaux. The temperature is a perfect 18 degrees Celsius. Its bouquet has notes of blackcurrant, cedar, and violet. It isn't corked. You just have an unsophisticated palate." A collective gasp was audible from the neighboring table. Mr. Henderson, a perpetually anxious man with a comb-over, began power-walking from his post near the entrance, his face turning a blotchy red. Tobias stared at her, a strange expression on his face. It wasn't just anger. It was a flicker of genuine shock, the look of a king who has just been told his clothes are missing by a commoner. And what would a little girl in a cheap apron know about a $5,000 bottle of wine? He sneered, recovering his composure. Audie's gaze didn't waver. "I know what my father taught me. He believed that wine was like a story. You don't just taste it, you listen to it. He had a cellar that you could only dream of, filled with stories from around the world." Tobias leaned back, a cruel smile playing on his lips. He was enjoying this now, this little distraction. "Oh, he had a cellar." Past tense. What happened? Did he drink his way through his fortune? The knot in Audie's chest uncoiled, releasing a decade of ice and fire into her veins. This was it. The moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times in the quiet of her tiny apartment over bowls of instant noodles that were a direct result of this man's actions. She took a small, deliberate step closer to the table, her presence suddenly feeling larger than her small frame. She ignored the frantic hand signals from Mr. Henderson, who was now hovering just a few feet away, looking like he was about to have a coronary. "No," Audie said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried an astonishing weight. "He didn't drink it. You took it. You took the cellar, the house, the company, his patents. You took his name. And then you took his life." The smirk vanished from Tobias Lennox's face. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a waxy pale sheen. He looked at her truly, looked at her at the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. A flicker of something ancient and buried recognition, or perhaps fear, danced in his pupils. Who are you?" He breathed the words barely audible. Audie reached up and her fingers went to the simple, worn silver locket she wore under her uniform. With a flick of her thumb, she opened it. She didn't show it to him. She didn't have to. She just looked him straight in the eye. "My name is Audrey Cole." She said the words falling like stones into the dead silence of the restaurant. My father was David Cole. The name hung in the air thick and suffocating. The junior partners looked at Tobias, then at Audie, their faces a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Mr. Henderson finally found his voice, a panicked squeak of Miss Cole. "That's enough." But Audie wasn't finished. She leaned in her voice for his ears only now, but the intensity of the moment held the entire section of the restaurant captive. "You don't remember me? I was 14. I was the girl in the background of the photos, in the articles that called you a visionary, and him a failure. The girl who watched them carry the furniture out of our home while you gave interviews about your bold new acquisition." Her gaze flickered towards the open pass-through to the kitchen, where the world-renowned executive chef Antoine Dubois was plating a complex dish. His brow furrowed in concentration. She raised her voice just enough to carry. "And I know you remember the name," she continued, her eyes locking back onto Tobias's. "Because before you destroyed him, my father was the man who discovered a young prodigal chef in a bistro in Lyon. The man who sponsored his visa invested in his talent and taught him that cooking wasn't just a craft, it was artistry. The man who taught Chef Antoine everything he knows." In the kitchen, under the hot white lights, Chef Antoine Dubois stopped moving. The intricate swirl of saffron foam he was applying to a piece of seared halibut faltered. His head snapped up, his dark eyes wide, fixing on the scene in the dining room. He had heard the name. David Cole. A name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in a decade. A name that was both a blessing and a wound. He looked at the arrogant billionaire, a man he had always despised serving, but whose patronage was essential for the restaurant's prestige. Then he looked at the young waitress, at her fierce, defiant stance, and for the first time he saw past the uniform to the ghost of his mentor in her features. The resemblance was unmistakable. It was in the stubborn set of her chin, the intelligence in her eyes. It was David's daughter. Audie delivered the final devastating blow, her voice ringing with the clarity of absolute truth. He called Antoine his greatest discovery. He used to say, "That boy will be a legend." He was so proud of him. He was proud of him right up until the day his heart gave out from the stress of the bankruptcy you engineered. The connection, sudden and violent, slammed into Chef Antoine with the force of a physical impact. The past he had tried to compartmentalize the guilt he had harbored for not being able to help the man who had given him everything, the mentor. He had lost it all, came rushing back in a single, overwhelming wave. His hand, the hand that could debone a fish in seconds, that could craft sugar sculptures as delicate as glass, went slack. The razor-sharp Japanese plating knife he was holding slipped from his grasp. Clang, clatter, skitter. The sound was shockingly loud in the now silent kitchen. The knife bounced off the stainless steel countertop and fell to the checkered floor, spinning twice before coming to a rest. Every cook, every sous chef, every dishwasher turned to stare. Chef Antoine Dubois, a man whose kitchen ran with the precision of a military operation, a man who never showed weakness, never made a mistake, stood frozen. His hand still hovering in the air where the knife had been. His face was ashen. His eyes locked on Audrey Cole with an expression of profound, earth-shattering shock. In the dining room, the sound was muffled, but its effect was absolute. The dropped knife was the punctuation mark on Audie's statement, a sonic boom that confirmed her every word. Tobias Lennox, for the first time in his adult life, looked utterly and completely defeated. The predator had become the prey. And in the center of it all stood the waitress, no longer invisible, but a towering figure of reckoning. The clatter of the dropped knife, though originating in the kitchen, ricocheted through the dining room like a gunshot. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world cracking. Every head that hadn't already turned towards Tobias Lennox's table now swiveled in unison. The hushed conversations died completely, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence, punctuated only by the faint, ironic melody of a Vivaldi piece playing over the restaurant's sound system. And Mr. Henderson finally broke through his paralysis, scuttling the last few feet to the table. "Security," he hissed into his lapel microphone, his voice trembling. "Table 7. He then turned to Audie, his face a mess of panic and fury. "You are finished! Get out! You will never work in this city again!" But Audie's focus remained locked on Tobias. The billionaire's face had cycled through a rapid series of emotions. Shock recognition, a flicker of something that might have been guilt, and finally the familiar, ugly mask of rage. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. He slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal glasses jump and a splash of the $5,000 wine leap from the decanter onto the white tablecloth like a blood stain. Lies. He roared, his voice regaining its power, but laced with a new raw edge of desperation. This is a shakedown, a pathetic attempt at extortion by some disgruntled... Nobody, he gestured at Audie, his hand trembling with fury. "She's insane! Get her out of my sight!" The two junior partners who had been frozen like statues now sprang into action, eager to prove their loyalty. One started to rise, puffing his chest out. "Now see here, miss. Sit down." "Robert," Tobias snapped without looking at him, and the man deflated back into his seat instantly. Tobias's battle was with Audie and Audie alone. Two burly security guards in ill-fitting suits were now converging on the table. But Audie didn't move. She hadn't expected to leave on her own terms. "It's not a shakedown, Tobias," she said, the use of his first name, a deliberate final twist of the knife. "It's a ghost story, and you're the one being haunted." She looked past him to the kitchen pass-through. Chef Antoine was still frozen, his staff staring at him in disbelief. His eyes met Audie's, and in them she saw a decade of buried pain. She had not only confronted her demon, she had awakened his. The security guards reached her, one grabbing her left arm, the other her right. Their grips were firm, professional, meant to intimidate. "There's no need for that," Audie said, calmly, not resisting. "I'm leaving." She allowed them to pull her away, her head held high. As they steered her past the gawking patrons, past the tables of the city's elite, who were now witnessing the great Tobias Lennox's public unraveling, she felt a strange sense of lightness. The knot in her chest, the one that had defined her existence for so long, was gone. In its place was a quiet, clean emptiness. Tobias watched her go, his breathing heavy, his knuckles white where he gripped the table. His carefully maintained facade of untouchable power was shattered. He wasn't a titan anymore. He was just a man exposed and vulnerable, with the entire restaurant as his audience. The delicious meal before him was now ashes in his mouth. "The show's over," he snarled at the room. "Go back to your meals." But no one did. They just stared, whispering behind their hands, their phones discreetly angled, to capture a photo of the flustered billionaire. The story was already taking shape, a piece of gossip so delicious it would be the talk of the town by morning. In the kitchen, the spell was finally broken. A sous chef tentatively touched Antoine's arm. "Chef, are you all right?" Chef Antoine blinked, looking down at the knife on the floor, as if seeing it for the first time. He then looked at his own trembling hand. David Cole's daughter, Audrey. He remembered the name now, a little girl with bright, curious eyes, who used to visit her father's office, the one David spoke of with such adoration. The man he had owed everything to. The man he had failed to stand by when Tobias Lennox's corporate machine had rolled in. The shame was a physical, bitter taste in his mouth. Jean-Luc Antoine said, his voice hoarse. "Take over the pass. Keep the orders moving." "Yes, chef." Without another word, Antoine untied his apron, letting it fall to the floor. He walked stiff-legged through the chaos of his kitchen, past his stunned brigade, and pushed through the swinging doors into the back alley. The cold night air hit him like a slap. He leaned against the rough brick wall, gulping it down, trying to clear his head. But all he could see was David Cole's smiling face, and then the haunted, determined eyes of his daughter. He had spent 10 years convincing himself there was nothing he could have done. In 10 seconds, that girl had shown him that was a lie. He had chosen prestige over loyalty. He had cooked for his mentor's murderer. Meanwhile, Audie was being unceremoniously escorted through the back-of-house corridors. They bypassed the locker room, a clear sign that she wouldn't even be allowed to retrieve her belongings. They shoved her through a heavy steel fire exit, and she found herself in the same grimy alley as Antoine, though he was further down, shrouded in the shadows. Mr. Henderson followed her out. His face still puce. "Your final paycheck will be mailed to you minus the cost of Mr. Lennox's wine, which I am personally holding you responsible for. Your P45 will list gross misconduct as the reason for termination. You are blacklisted, Cole. Blacklisted, the only place you'll be serving food is a soup kitchen." He was shouting, his voice echoing off the damp brickwork. Audie simply looked at him, her silence more unnerving to him than any argument would have been. "Are you finished?" she asked quietly. Henderson flustered, pointed a trembling finger at her. "Get out of here. Don't you ever set foot on this property again." He spun around and stormed back inside, slamming the metal door behind him. Audie stood alone in the alley for a moment, the sounds of the city, a distant siren, the rumble of traffic seeping back into her awareness. She took a deep breath. It was done. Step 1, at least. She had faced him. She had spoken the truth. She had no job, no money to speak of, and a $5,000 debt to a man who would likely try to ruin her further. But she was free. She began walking towards the street, her footsteps quiet on the cracked pavement. "Wait." The voice came from the shadows. It was low with a thick French accent. Chef Antoine Dubois stepped out from the darkness, his tall chef's hat looking absurd in the grimy alley. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a conflict she could not yet read. "What you said in there," he began, his voice rough. "About your father, David Cole." It was the truth, Audie said simply. He nodded slowly, his gaze searching her face. "I know. I see him in you." He took a step closer. "Why now? After all this time?" "Because I was a child then," Audie replied, her voice hardening slightly. "And because I had to wait until I was in a position to look him in the eye while I said it." I couldn't do that from the street. Antoine winced, the words hitting their mark. He had been in a position to say something. He had a name, a reputation. But he had remained silent, hiding behind the heat of his stoves. When the acquisition happened, Antoine said the words tasting like poison. It was all very fast. Lawyers' papers. David told me not to worry, that he had protected my position, my restaurant concept within the company. He was always trying to protect everyone else. He was already agreed, a lump forming in her throat. Then he was gone. They said he had mismanaged the finances, that he was unstable. Lennox's people, they painted a picture, and it was easier to believe a part of it. To believe David was a brilliant creator, but a poor businessman. It was easier than believing the alternative, that Tobias Lennox is a thief and a liar. Antoine met her gaze, and for the first time the conflict in his eyes resolved into a hard, cold certainty. Yes. He sighed, a heavy, ragged sound. I have cooked for that man for 8 years. I have taken his money, accepted his praise, and let this restaurant become his personal clubhouse, all while knowing deep down what he did to the man who was like a father to me. He looked down at his hands, the source of his fame and his shame. When you spoke his name, David's name, and you looked at me, I realized my legacy is built on the ruins of his. The knife. It just fell. I think my soul dropped it. Audie watched him, saying nothing, allowing him the space for his confession. They will fire you. They will try to destroy you. He will not let this go, Antoine stated, looking at her with grim certainty. I know, Audie said. I'm counting on it. A flicker of surprise crossed Antoine's face. What do you mean? Tobias Lennox's greatest weapon is his reputation. His power comes from the belief that he is untouchable. Tonight, in front of 50 of the most influential people in the city, a waitress made him touchable. He's going to overreact. He's going to come after me with everything he has to prove he's still in control. And when he does, he'll get sloppy. Antoine stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. This wasn't just an emotional outburst. This was a calculated move. This was a plan. David Cole was a brilliant creator, but his daughter, it seemed, was a brilliant strategist. You cannot fight him alone, Antoine said. He has armies of lawyers, publicists, fixers. I know, Audie said again. She finally let a small, weary smile touch her lips. But he doesn't have you, does he? The question hung in the cold night air. It was an invitation, a challenge and a plea all at once. For 10 years, Antoine Dubois had been the celebrated chef, the culinary king of the city. But he had also been a coward. Here in this alley was his chance to be something more. A chance to repay a debt that had haunted his sleep for a decade. He looked at the determined, tired face of his mentor's daughter. He thought of the lies he had swallowed, the truth he had ignored. He thought of the satisfying clang of his knife hitting the floor. No, Antoine, said his voice, now firm, resolute. He does not. He straightened up, his posture changing. The guilt seemed to recede, replaced by a long-forgotten fire. My contract is with the restaurant group, not with Lennox. But my loyalty is with the name Cole. He met her eyes. So Audrey Cole. Tell me, what is step 2? The story of the waitress and the billionaire spread through the city's upper crust like a contagion. It was too perfect, too dramatic to remain contained within Ethelgard's walls. By breakfast the next morning, hedge fund managers were recounting it over their eggs. Benedict and society wives were breathlessly texting the details across town. The narrative, as it often does, morphed with each telling. In some versions, Audie had thrown the wine in Tobias's face. In others, Chef Antoine had emerged from the kitchen with a meat cleaver. But the core elements remained the waitress, the accusation, the name David Cole, and the dropped knife. For Tobias Lennox, the morning was apoplectic. His phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. His PR chief, a slick operator named Marcus Thorne, was in full crisis mode. We're framing it as a desperate, unstable ex-employee with a grudge, Marcus said, pacing Tobias's penthouse office. The view of the city from the floor-to-ceiling windows was majestic, a kingdom Tobias had built. Yet today, it felt like a fishbowl. We've already leaked a story to a friendly blogger about her being fired for theft from a previous job. It's a fabrication, of course, but it muddies the water. Muddy the water! Tobias bellowed, slamming his coffee cup down so hard it cracked the marble coaster. I want her buried, Marcus. I want her name to be synonymous with liar and extortionist. I want her begging for a job scrubbing toilets. We have to be careful, Tobias Marcus cautioned. A full-scale public attack on a young waitress can look like bullying. The optics are terrible. Right now, it's just gossip. If we go too hard, we legitimize her story. We make people wonder why you're so angry. I'm angry because a slip of a girl in a polyester uniform humiliated me in my own city, he roared. He strode to the window, staring down at the empire he had forged through ruthlessness and cunning. The David Cole affair had been one of his earliest, most defining victories. It was perfect, legally airtight. He had bankrupted him through a series of hostile buyouts of his suppliers, choked his credit lines, and then swooped in with a lowball offer for his tech company, Cole Innovations, when he was at his most desperate. The patents for David's revolutionary solar energy storage technology had made Tobias his first billion. He'd told the world David was a dreamer who couldn't manage a business. The world had believed him. Find her. Tobias commanded, his voice a low growl. Find out where she lives. Find out who her friends are. Find her every weakness and squeeze. And this chef, this Antoine Dubois. Find his weakness too. No one embarrasses me and gets away with it. No one. Audie, meanwhile, was miles away from the world of penthouses and PR teams. She was in her small walk-up apartment in a far less glamorous part of the city. The place was sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. The only personal items of real value were on a single bookshelf, a row of her father's engineering journals, and a framed photo of him, a kind-faced man with a brilliant smile holding a much younger Audie on his shoulders. She hadn't slept. Adrenaline and a decade of suppressed emotion had seen to that. She sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands when her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Audrey Cole?" a voice asked. It was male, cautious. "Who is this?" "My name is Ben Carter. I'm a reporter with the New York Chronicle." Audie's heart skipped a beat. The Chronicle was a serious paper, not a gossip rag. "I'm not interested in talking," she said, her voice flat. "Miss Cole." "Please," the reporter said, his tone earnest. "I'm not calling about the scene at Ethelgard's. Well, not directly. I'm calling about your father, David Cole." This caught her off guard. "My father?" "Yes. I'm an investigative journalist. For the last 6 months, I've been working on a profile of Tobias Lennox. A deep dive, and a name that keeps coming up in my off-the-record background checks is David Cole. The story I was told was that your father was a brilliant but flawed innovator who was outmaneuvered by Lennox. a standard corporate takeover story. But last night's incident suggests there might be more to it. Someone who was there called me. They said what you said made the chef drop his knife. That's not a detail you invent. Audie was silent, her mind racing. This was an unexpected development, a powerful one. What do you want, Mr. Carter? The truth, he said simply. Lennox surrounds himself with non-disclosure agreements and high-priced lawyers. People are terrified of him. You're the first person who has ever stood up to him publicly. If you have a story to tell, I can provide the platform to tell it, and I can protect my sources. Before Audie could respond, there was a knock at her door, a loud official-sounding knock. Mr. Carter. I have to go, she said quickly, and hung up. She looked through the peephole. 2 men in suits stood in the hallway. They didn't look like police officers. They looked like lawyers. She opened the door a crack, leaving the security chain on. Miss Audrey Cole, the older man asked, holding up a leather-bound folder. Yes, I'm Daniel Shapiro from the firm of Sterling, Cromwell and Lennox. I represent Mr. Tobias Lennox. He said the name as if it were a weapon. We are here to serve you with a cease and desist letter, demanding your immediate retraction of the slanderous and defamatory statements made against my client last night. He slid a thick envelope through the crack in the door. Furthermore, we are filing a civil suit for damages to Mr. Lennox's reputation in the amount of $5 million. Audie stared at the envelope. $5 million. It was a laughable, impossible number designed not to be won, but to crush her under its weight. This letter also contains a settlement offer. The lawyer continued, his voice smooth and predatory. Mr. Lennox is prepared to drop the lawsuit and provide you with a modest sum for your troubles in exchange for a full public apology and a legally binding permanent non-disclosure agreement. It was the classic Lennox move. The iron fist in the velvet glove. Threaten obliteration, then offer a golden kiss. And if I refuse Audie, asked her voice steady. The lawyer smiled a thin, unpleasant expression. Then we will see you in court, Miss Cole, and I assure you we will litigate this matter into the ground. We will depose you for weeks. We will subpoena every email, every text message you've ever sent. We will scrutinize every corner of your life until there is nothing left. By the time we are done, you won't have a penny to your name or a shred of credibility left. Have a nice day. The 2 men turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing down the hall. Audie closed the door, her back pressing against it. She looked at the thick envelope on the floor. It was exactly as she'd predicted. He was overreacting. He was trying to swat a fly with a sledgehammer. And it was her opening. She picked up her phone and redialed the reporter Ben Carter. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice ringing with newfound purpose. I think it's time we had a talk. Across town, Chef Antoine Dubois was facing his own battle. He had been summoned to the corporate headquarters of the hospitality group that owned Ethel Gard's. In a sterile grey boardroom, he sat opposite a panel of 3 executives, including the group's CEO, a steely-eyed woman named Eleanor Pemsley. Antoine Eleanor began, her voice devoid of warmth. I don't need to tell you what a disaster last night was. Our premier restaurant, our biggest spending client, and our star chef at the center of a public spectacle. The damage to the brand is significant. Antoine sat impassively, his chef's whites replaced by a simple black sweater. He looked tired, but resolute. Tobias Lennox is demanding your immediate termination. Another executive piped in. He's threatening to pull all of his corporate accounts, not just from Ethelgard's, but from our hotels as well. We're talking about millions in revenue. So you are going to fire me, Antoine stated. It wasn't a question. Eleanor Pemsley steepled her fingers. We value you, Antoine. Your name is a brand in itself. You have 2 Michelin stars. We don't want to lose you, but we are businessmen. We are asking you to make a choice. She slid a piece of paper across the polished table. This is a statement. It says you had a momentary health issue last night, a dizzy spell from the heat of the kitchen, which caused you to drop the knife. It states that the waitress, a troubled employee who was fired, took advantage of your brief indisposition to create a scene. It says you have no knowledge of her claims and that you consider Tobias Lennox a valued patron and a man of integrity. Antoine looked at the paper. It was a pre-packaged lie designed to smooth everything over, to put the genie back in the bottle. All he had to do was sign. His career would be safe. The restaurants, the stars, the acclaim, it would all be his. He thought of David Cole, the man who had believed in him when he was a nobody. He thought of Audrey, her eyes burning with a fire he hadn't seen in years. He pushed the paper back across the table. I will not sign this, he said quietly. The CEO's eyes narrowed. Antoine, think very carefully about what you're doing. I have, he replied. For 10 years I have done nothing but think. Last night I stopped thinking, and I started feeling. What that girl said was the truth. Tobias Lennox is a crook. He destroyed a good man, and I have been complicit in my silence for far too long. He stood up. You do not have to fire me, Eleanor. I quit. He turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving the 3 executives staring in stunned silence. He had just walked away from the pinnacle of his profession. Like Audie, he had nothing but the uncertain future ahead of him. But for the first time in a very long time, he felt he could breathe. His first call was to Audrey. Audie, it's Antoine, he said when she picked up. I am out. What do we do next? I'm glad you called. Audie's voice came back stronger than he'd ever heard it. I've just been talking to a reporter from the Chronicle, and I have a lawsuit for $5 million against me. I think we have Tobias's attention. Now we need proof. Something concrete that the reporter can use. Something that proves the story of Cole Innovations wasn't what he told the world. Antoine's mind began to churn. Proof. David was meticulous. He kept journals, notebooks, not just for his work, but personal ones too. He wrote everything down. Tobias's lawyers would have seized all of that during the bankruptcy. Audie said a note of defeat in her voice. Most of it, yes. Antoine said, a distant memory sparking in his mind. But David was a sentimental man. He gave gifts. He trusted people. He once showed me his original concept sketches for the solar storage unit, the very first ones. He was so proud of them. They were drawn on cocktail napkins from the bistro in Lyon where we met. Do you know where they are? Audie asked, her voice sharp with anticipation. I think so, Antoine replied, his heart beginning to beat faster. He gave them to me, as a gift, a reminder of where we both started. I haven't seen them in years. They're in a box somewhere, with my old things, my first chef's jacket, my knives from culinary school. He knew exactly where they were, in a storage unit, a time capsule of a past he had tried to forget. Those napkins weren't just sketches. They were dated. They were proof of Harstept. They were the genesis of the billion-dollar technology Tobias Lennox had built his empire on. Antoine Audi said, her voice electric. "We need to get to that storage unit. Now!" The mission now had a singular focus: find a weapon. They needed something irrefutable, a piece of the past that Tobias Lennox's army of lawyers couldn't bury. "We need proof." Antoine Audi said, her voice tight with urgency during a hushed phone call. "Something concrete that proves my father's work predates Lennox's entire story." Antoine was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, the silence stretching on. "David." He was sentimental, he said finally, a new energy in his voice. "He gave gifts. A reminder of where you came from," he'd say. A distant memory sparked, suddenly vivid. The napkins. "My God. Audrey, the napkins." He quickly explained. In the small Lyon bistro where David Cole had discovered him, he had sketched his initial revolutionary ideas for a solar storage battery on the back of 3 flimsy cocktail napkins. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated genius. He gave them to "Kumi," Antoine said, his voice thick with resurrected emotion. "He laughed and told me to keep them so I'd always remember the night a great chef and a great idea were born. They're in my old storage unit, with my papers from Lyon." The storage facility was a bleak, monolithic building on the city's industrial fringe. As Antoine heaved the unit's corrugated metal door open, the smell of old paper and dormant memories filled the cold, still air. They worked with a shared, frantic urgency, knowing Lennox's net would be closing around them. A world away in his penthouse office, Tobias was simmering with rage. "Find them," he snarled at his head of security, the ruthlessly efficient Gavriel. "Find the chef and find the girl. Check their financials, their known associates, anything." A few keystrokes later, Gavriel had an address. "Dubois has rented a storage unit in the Queens district since 2010, he reported. "My team is moving on it now." Back in the cold, concrete corridor, Audi and Antoine were digging through a plastic tub labeled Lyon 2005-2010. At the very bottom, beneath old menus and journals, was a large, yellowed manila envelope. With trembling fingers, Antoine broke the brittle wax seal and tipped the contents onto a dusty trunk. Out fell a few faded photos and 3 cocktail napkins. They were browned with age and stained with rings of red wine, but the ink was unmistakable. In David Cole's elegant script were drawings of interlocking hexagonal cells with notes on chemical compositions. Le7, La3, Zr2, O12, and energy density calculations, scribbled in the margins. At the bottom of the 3rd napkin, clear as day, was a signature and a date. D. Cole. Octo 12, 2008. "This is it," Audie whispered, her heart pounding. It was the genesis of the billion-dollar Lennox Phoenix battery. It was the ghost in the machine. The date Antoine breathed. October 2008. Lennox claimed his R&D team developed this technology independently in 2011. This proves he's a liar, as Audie carefully photographed the napkins with her phone. They heard it. The slide of the main access door at the end of the hall, followed by heavy footsteps and gruff voices. "Unit C47, a voice commanded. "Belongs to an Antoine Dubois. Boss wants it opened. Quietly." They froze their eyes, locking in shared terror. They were trapped. Thinking fast, Audie grabbed Antoine's old leather knife roll from a shelf. She unbuckled it, carefully slid the 3 precious napkins between the protective folds, that shielded the blades and buckled it shut again. Then she grabbed one of Antoine's heavy, hard-bound recipe journals. "Get ready," she whispered, her voice a strange mix of fear and steel. "We run for the car, no matter what." The lock on their unit clicked. The metal door began to slide upwards, revealing two large men in dark suits. "Well, well, look what we have, huh?" the first man began. "Now!" Audie screamed. She shoved the heavy journal into the first man's face with all her might. He staggered back with a grunt, colliding with his partner. In that split second of chaos, Antoine, fueled by pure adrenaline, charged. He was not a small man, and he hit the second guard like a linebacker, sending him sprawling into the corridor. "Go!" Antoine yelled. Audie didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the fallen man, the heavy knife roll clutched tightly under her arm, and sprinted down the concrete hallway towards the grey afternoon light. Antoine was right behind her, their footsteps echoing in the sudden shouts of the men pursuing them. They burst out into the open air, their sedan parked 50 yards away. It felt like a mile. They were halfway there when one of the men chasing them raised a small, dark object. It wasn't a gun. It was a taser. He fired. The twin probes trailing thin wires hit Antoine squarely in the back. He shouted in pain and collapsed, his body convulsing violently on the asphalt. Antoine Audie screamed, skidding to a halt. "Forget me! Go!" Antoine gasped, the electricity racking his body. The proof. Go! The two men were closing in fast. Tears of frustration and fear streamed down Audie's face. Leaving him felt like a betrayal, an impossible choice. But he was right. The napkins were everything. With a gut-wrenching sob, she turned and sprinted the last few yards to the car. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she fumbled the key into the lock and threw herself inside. The engine roared to life just as the men reached Antoine's still form. One of them looked up, locking eyes with her through the windshield. Audie slammed the car into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The tires squealed as the sedan shot forward, leaving the industrial estate and her friend behind. She drove her knuckles white, her mind a chaotic storm. She had the proof, but Tobias had her friend. Her phone rang, flashing Ben Carter's name. She answered, her voice trembling. "Ben, they have Antoine. Lennox's men, they took him." She looked at the precious knife roll on the passenger seat. "But I have it. I have the proof that can burn his empire to the ground." There was a hard pause on the other end of the line. "Okay, Audie," Ben said, his voice suddenly grim and steady. All journalistic calm replaced by the tone of a co-conspirator. "Don't panic. Don't go to the police. You need to disappear. Right now. We need a new plan, a bolder one. We're not just breaking a story anymore. We're going to war." 2 days passed in a blur of paranoia and planning. Antoine had vanished, swallowed by Tobias Lennox's shadow machine, and the fear for his safety was a constant cold weight in Audie's stomach. It also hardened her resolve into something razor-sharp. She met with Ben Carter in a series of clandestine locations, the journalist now a field commander in their two-person war. "A direct media leak won't work," Ben stated, his voice low. "Lennox will bury the story in litigation, claim the napkins are forgeries and paint you as a fanatic. We can't win in a courtroom, not yet. We have to win in the court of public opinion, and we have to do it on his turf in a way he can't control." The plan they devised was audacious, bordering on insane. The target, the annual Lennox Foundation Charity Gala, Tobias's glittering monument to his own philanthropy. It was the height of his hypocrisy, and therefore the perfect stage for his downfall. "You can't get in as yourself," Ben had said. "But the event is catered. You'll hide in plain sight." A new identity. Anna Peterson was forged. Her signature blonde hair was dyed a deep, inconspicuous brown, and with a pair of non-prescription glasses, the fiery Audie Cole vanished. Replaced by someone utterly forgettable, she was hired as temporary wait staff for the event. Meanwhile, Ben worked a crucial side angle. He sent a single encrypted email to the one person who might be an ally on the inside Tobias Lennox's son Julian. The subject line read, "Do you know the truth about David Cole?" Attached was a high-resolution photo of the incriminating napkin. The night of the gala arrived. The hotel ballroom was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and black ties. Tobias Lennox stood at the entrance, beaming, shaking hands, the benevolent king, welcoming guests to his court. He looked powerful, untouchable. Audie now. Anna moved through the chaos of the back-of-house staging area, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Her uniform was crisp, her tray heavy with champagne flutes. She was invisible. A tiny earpiece meant for catering communication connected her to Ben, who was monitoring everything from a nearby hotel room. Her first hurdle was Julian. As planned, he found her near the raw bar, looking pale and nervous. "Anna Peterson?" he asked under his breath. Audie nodded. "Thank you for doing this. My father needs to be stopped," Julian said, his jaw tight. "For years I've had suspicions. That napkin confirmed everything." He discreetly passed her a small USB drive. "This is a direct access key to the AV system. The tech in the control booth is loyal to me. He's waiting for my signal. You have a 2-minute window once the keynote starts." "Antoine," Audie whispered, her voice pleading. "Do you know where he is?" Julian's face darkened. "My father is holding him at a private wellness retreat upstate. He's unharmed, but they're keeping him sedated, trying to coerce him into signing a statement against you. Once this is over, I'll give you the exact location. We'll get him out." The promise gave Audie a surge of strength. The time came. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight found Tobias Lennox as he walked to the podium to thunderous applause. "Thank you." He began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Tonight we celebrate the power of a vision to change the world for the better." This was the signal. Audie, tray in hand, moved with purpose along the back wall towards the small, curtained-off alcove housing the AV control booth. A single security guard stood near the entrance. "Excuse me, sir," Audie said calmly. The AV crew ordered champagne. The guard, distracted by the speech, grunted and waved her through. She slipped behind the curtain to find a young technician who gave her a single tense nod and pointed to a port on the main console. On stage, Tobias was hitting his stride. Because true innovation isn't just about ideas. It's about the courage and fortitude to bring those ideas to life. "My talent, if I have one, is in seeing the potential that others miss." "Do it," Audie whispered. The technician plugged in the drive. On the massive screen behind Tobias, the Lennox Foundation logo flickered and went black. Tobias paused momentarily, thrown. Then a new image appeared. It was the cocktail napkin. It filled the 20-foot screen in stunning high definition. Every wine stain, every crease, every hand-drawn line was visible to the 1,000-plus guests. Magnified to the size of a car was the signature and date D. Cole, Oct. 12, 2008. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Tobias turned, his smile faltering as he saw the image. His face went white. Then the second slide appeared, a side-by-side comparison of the napkin and the official patent diagram for his Lennox Phoenix battery. They were identical. The murmur grew into a wave of shocked whispers. People were pointing their phones held aloft. Tobias stared at the screen, his mouth agape. And then came the final blow. An audio file began to play over the ballroom's pristine sound system. It was Antoine's voice, shaky but clear. "Yes. That is the napkin David Cole drew for me in 2008. It is his original concept for the battery technology." There was a pause, then his voice returned, filled with righteous anger. "Tobias Lennox is a liar and a thief. He stole David's dream, he stole his company, and he drove him to his grave. I am saying this now because the truth must be told. My name is Antoine Dubois, and Tobias Lennox is holding me against my will to try and silence me." The audio cut out, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a physical force. Every eye was on Tobias, who stood frozen in the spotlight, which now felt less like an embrace and more like an interrogation lamp. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The king was naked on his own stage, his legacy exposed as a fraud. From the crowd, a single person began to applaud. It was Julian Lennox, standing at his table, his face a mask of grim vindication. Then a side door to the ballroom burst open. A woman strode in her waitress jacket and glasses gone. Her brown hair was hastily tied back, but her eyes, the same fiery eyes that had faced him in the restaurant, burned with triumph. It was Audrey Cole. She walked calmly to the foot of the stage and looked up at the man who had destroyed her family. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence was the final devastating exclamation point. The waitress had returned, and this time she had brought the whole damn kingdom crashing down. Tobias Lennox's empire didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Faced with irrefutable proof and the testimony of his own son, his partners fled, his stocks became worthless, and the full weight of the justice system came down on him. But this story isn't about the fall of a titan. It's about the resilience of those he trampled. It's about a daughter's unwavering quest for justice, a chef's journey to reclaim his honor, and the quiet courage it takes to speak truth to immense power. Audrey Cole and Antoine Dubois didn't just expose a lie. They built a new truth, creating a foundation to ensure that what happened to David Cole will never happen to another brilliant mind. Their story is a powerful reminder that no one is truly untouchable, and that sometimes the most powerful voice can come from the person you least expect. What did you think of Audie's incredible courage? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe for more true life dramas that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching.